I didn't want to touch on the Council of Nicaea because I feel like that's a very big turning point in the history of the church. So can you just, in summary, tell our audience like what exactly happened during that time? Because obviously, with the Trinity and all these ideas, they came to fruition.
So, in the early period of the church, which means the first 3 centuries, there were enormous schisms in Christianity. These schisms did not begin after the New Testament was written. We find these schisms in the writings of the New Testament, particularly in the letters of Paul and the book of Acts. Christians are fighting each other nonstop. In fact, in Paul's writings, it's Christians that are fighting with Christians more than Jews, meaning non-Christian Jews. The idea that Jesus was divine and God-like is already developing in the Christian Bible. It's a slow development with an adoptionist theology in the book of Mark. By the time you get to the book of John, which is the last, probably written about 95, the last book to be written in the New Testament, Jesus is already presented as a divine being. Now, a divine being in the Greco-Roman world does not mean God created the universe equal to Jupiter. It meant that you were like divine, like you were up there. But this was a henotheistic pagan system where there's like the great God and then there are many, many lower tier gods that were both mortal and divine at the same time. But you see where all this is going. This is all moving into full-blown idolatry. By the 2nd century, we have Tertullian, a church father from Carthage, who comes up with the word Trinity, invents it at the end of the 2nd century. It's so interesting that you have Rabbi Huda Nasi in Israel compiling the Mishnah. At the very same time, in Carthage, you have Tertullian, exact same time, inventing the word Trinity. He didn't believe in the Trinity in the Orthodox sense, but it was already emerging in the early church that Jesus was God. But they had a problem, and that is, we have to believe there's one God because we believe in the Jewish Bible, and if God the Father is God, but there's also God the Son, doesn't that make 2 gods? And if there's a Holy Spirit that's God, doesn't make it 3 gods? And that can't be. And there's enormous division in the church in the 2nd, 3rd, and early 4th century. Huge division of exactly what was the nature of Jesus' divinity. Enormous issue. The basic argument came down to, was Jesus from the get-go always God equal to the Father and was eternal, had no beginning? Or was there a point in time when only the Father existed and Jesus the Son came into existence in the eternal past? This was the explosion in the church. And it became just such a battle that the whole church was divided over this. These were not the only 2 views, but these are the 2 big views that emerged by the 4th century. What changes everything is in the year 312, in the fall of 312, the Emperor of Rome, Constantine, Yamach Shemai V'Zechro, is a big anti-Semite. He wins a battle in October of 312, and he attributes his victory to the Christian God. And as a result, he essentially becomes a Christian and makes Christianity a legal religion. So now Christianity is a legal religion, and then it would emerge to be a preferred religion. It doesn't become the official religion of the Roman Empire until later on in the 4th century. But Constantine was very unhappy with this schism about what was the nature of the divinity of Jesus. So this is a huge argument. There was a thinker, actually 2 thinkers from Alexandria that fought over this. And this was an enormous dispute, and Constantine was very unhappy with this. There was one other schism in the church that had to be solved. This is what most people don't know. And that is when to celebrate Easter. Until that point, most Christians celebrate Easter based on when the Jews said it was Passover. Now, I don't want to get more complicated because John disagrees with the Synoptic Gospels over on what day Jesus was crucified. I don't want to get into that, so I'm just going to leave it alone and just say that a large, significant segment of the Christian world for the first 3 centuries celebrated Easter when the Jews said it was Passover. The Jewish calendar is oral Torah, okay? In order to create a Jewish calendar, you need to have information how to create the calendar and when to intercalate an extra month in order to keep Passover in the springtime, because the Torah says so in Deuteronomy 16, verse 1. It's oral Torah. Right now, just take my word for it. You have to know an oral tradition in order to know how to have a calendar. Meaning you need the Jews. It's not a 12-month calendar. There's nowhere in Tanakh that says a year is comprised by 12 months. Doesn't exist. I know you think it does. It doesn't. Now, so listen carefully. But as you can imagine, in Rome, it was becoming a little... Bishops in Rome and roundabout were becoming very uneasy about the notion that we have to rely on the Jews when to determine when Easter was. So another idea was going is we have to do away with the Jewish view altogether and set Easter to another date. These were the 2 issues that really were set to divide the empire, the deity of Jesus and the calendar. Do we depend on the Jews for determining when Easter was? And Constantine called bishops, summoned bishops from the east and the west. Remember, Constantine presided over both the east and the west, and that would continue until Theodosius, the end of the 4th century, when Theodosius was emperor. The east and the west were under a common emperor during this period. And the key point is, he said he called bishops, hundreds of them came, and had to set this and voted on it. And ultimately... I write about this in Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical. Ultimately, there's a vote, and the Christians decide, the bishops decide, that we're going to believe in the iteration of the doctrine of the Trinity, that Jesus is eternal, that he was always eternal, and he's very light, the creed that emerges from the Council of Nicaea, and that Easter will not be determined by the Jewish calendar based on the vernal equinox, which is the solar calendar, and that has an enormous consequence, because that's why the church became very anti-Torah Sheba'al Peh, anti the oral Torah, and the church would just become completely weighed down by this idolatry, which is a self-inflicted wound from which they have never recovered.
Adon olam asher malach בטרם כל יציר נברא